Alpha Team, this is Chief of Security Blanchard. Are you a sight for sore eyes?
You're out of your mind. And look, it's taking too long for people to wake up, I think. But again, when you go and you have to pay for your groceries, it's more difficult, I think, to delude yourself at that point. And we see exactly the road we're going down. So what do you think?
Well, the promises that he made were about division, racism, bigotry, deportations, destroying the economy. He said all that stuff. He just didn't campaign on it. He said during the campaign when he on the laugh about firing unionized folks who wanted a decent living wage and also their contributions to growing companies having their part. They laughed and said, "Oh, you're good at that. You kicked them out." He pointed out that tariffs are the way he's going to go about things. It's just he lied to them again and said that that's how things work. We were the most prosperous ever. You know who was most prosperous when McKinley was implementing rich people? That was before killing everyone with absolutely zero evidence. They just found all this corruption and overspending and billions of dollars in the government that I'm going to explain on. So they're celebrating and waving their hands and screaming and throwing around their red hats. So the next question, all you folks celebrating, is what's the mechanism, what's the system that Elon Musk has put into place to now he's collected all these hundreds of billions of dollars in his chest pockets? After that, how does that
If you wanted to disabuse yourself of the notion that being rich automatically means that you're smart, all you have to do is spend some time listening to Elon Musk. As the judiciary presents itself as a bulwark against Trump and Elon's corrupt edicts, Elon took to Twitter writing, "If any judge anywhere can stop every presidential action everywhere, we do not live in a democracy." So, here's the thing. If any judge anywhere can stop every presidential action everywhere, then that is quite literally what a democracy is. Democracy is when a judge who's sworn an oath to uphold the law and uphold the Constitution can block an action, yes, even one from the President of the United States, which is illegal, corrupt, or unconstitutional. And when Elon complains that a judge can stop, quote, every action, that's not a reflection on the judge, it is a reflection on the president. If every action is being blocked, is worthy of being blocked, it's because every action is illegal. Again, not a judge problem, but a Trump problem. And in turn, an Elon problem. Hence why he's so bent out of shape about it. In fact, the federal judiciary has quickly turned into the principal obstacle to this administration. So far, judges have issued temporary restraining orders, TROs, against nearly every action attempted by this White House, including the effort to freeze all funding, the effort to ban birthright citizenship, the effort to eliminate USAID, the raft of improper firings without cause, and access granted to Elon's Doge employees, which allowed them to access sensitive financial information from the Treasury. In fact, just this week, a federal judge in Manhattan extended the temporary restraining order that blocked Doge employees from accessing Treasury data. And I'm sorry, but the fact that the hill that these people are dying on is that some random billionaire and his gang of teenage stooges should have unfettered access to our most sensitive financial information is a testament to the extent to which they have lost the plot. Just try and imagine what Republicans would say if Democrats granted some Democratic billionaire access to Americans' Treasury data. I asked Representative Garcia, and he didn't mince words.
Congressman, what do you think Republicans would say if a Democratic president was in office right now basically gave George Soros unfettered access to pilfer all of our federal aid? I mean, it's insane. I think Joe Biden or Barack Obama brought in, right, the richest person on the planet, or George Soros or anyone else, and just allowed them to do whatever they want with our information, they would be going ballistic. They'd probably be attacking the Capitol again multiple times. And so these folks are, besides being, in my opinion, insane in the way they're viewing the world, they are serious about destroying our institutions and our democracy. They want to fundamentally change not just the United States, but they want to change the world, the way they view it. Their view of the world, their view of our country is one where you take care of yourself and your family and screw everybody else. And that's a conservative principle that I just cannot support. I think what makes Democrats being progressive, I think the right way forward for us in our country is taking care of those that need help the most. That government is in place to help them. And that's something that unfortunately we're not at right now.
Also within the last 24 hours, another judge, Amy Berman Jackson, issued a ruling blocking the White House from deleting CFPB data, firing CFPB employees, and transferring money from CFPB's reserve fund. I asked Elizabeth Warren about the prospect of the White House refusing to abide by these orders, and here's what she had to say.
Okay, now it's really on a constitutional crisis, right? Because as you know, we have three branches in government, and Congress gets to it.
So Elon Musk, the Tesla CEO, is growing his cult following and his cult family. That's the subject of today's video, and I guess he's got at least 13 kids now. I say at least because, honestly, I don't know how many kids Elon Musk has, and I doubt even Elon knows how many kids he's got. This is the latest. Elon, at 53, could be father of children for another 30 years. Great. And essentially, this is a regular photographer side. Joe has got to go. And she likes to crown the guy that Elon Musk has many children with multiple names. This says 13 children. I honestly don't know. One of these people is one of his former employees. Elon Musk often walks around the office and asks people if they want sperm. He's a weird guy. That's the only way to put it. And what's creepy enough about this thing is, I guess women go along with this thing. These are some of the other women that are involved with Elon Musk's many kids. And this is the new one. Ashley St. Clair is her name. And this is a statement. She says, 5 months ago, I welcomed a new baby into the world. Elon Musk is the father. I have previously disclosed. It's a real story. I have not previously disclosed this to protect our children's child's privacy and safety, but in recent days it has become clear that tabloid media intends to do so regardless of a safe environment. For that reason, I ask that the media honor our child's privacy and refrain from invasive reporting. So I understand that. When word gets out that you're, having kids with Elon, it becomes news, and you want to keep it private, but you're like hanging out with the world's richest dude, and you're also a blogger yourself, so that's kind of awkward. Andrew Tate's even weighing in. Standard conqueror's behavior. Imagine only having children with one woman. Laughy face, laughy face, laughy face. So that's Andrew Tate's point of view. This is Brian Glicklick, and I think this guy's like their communication person who's advising this blogger person on how to talk about having Elon's kids. And yes, this drama is pretty nuts. And I'm illustrating this stuff because I want you to understand the guy who's got the keys to the world, essentially, right? Controlling everything, President Musk. This is who he is. You have to show it. This is who this guy is. That's why it's so insane. Brian says, Ashley and Elon have been privately working toward the creation of an agreement, so I guess we're making this sort of contract here, about raising their child for some time. It is disappointing that a tabloid reporter repeatedly ambushed Ashley and her family made it impossible to complete that process confidentially. We are waiting for Elon to publicly acknowledge his parental role with Ashley to end unwarranted speculation, and Ashley trusts that Elon intends to finish their agreement quickly in the best interest of the well-being security of the child they share. I know I'm laughing. It probably shouldn't be that funny, but frankly it is. And guys, this is the communication person, I guess, that Ashley. You can see his picture right there. He says he's an expert in virtual broadcasting, print commentator on crisis and strategic communications, and he also. Sometimes I can't keep a straight face, but this stuff is so ridiculous. This is Brian Glicklick. I guess he's an expert in boycott defense. Because I'm kind of interested in you guys know where boycott Elon Musk stock, his products, etc. He's also an expert in, I guess, playing search engine results, reputation management, so cleaning the internet, bad things about you. Cybersecurity and data breaching, obviously Elon's going to need help with that. And online harassment and bullying, which this world that these people live in is so insane. And you guys would say, oh, Chris, you're so mean, you're so dumb. Guys, this is all public stuff. This is all public stuff. This is Elon Musk meeting with Prime Minister Modi of India, right, the leader of India, hanging out with his baby mamas and multiple kids. And I have to show you this stuff because I want to understand that this is a cult. This is a cult, right? We're talking about a Tesla cult, and also talking about an Elon cult. They're kind of different, kind of same, but once you understand it's a cult, it makes everything else make more sense. What does a cult want? They want Lord Elon to come save them, okay?
And I have to show the many wives, and many kids, because understand, right? For those of you who work with children, have children, for those of you who don't have children whatsoever, it is frankly impossible. I'm going to make it really clear, and you know this. It's frankly impossible to be a good father to all 13 kids and have multiple women involved with this thing, right? Again, you're not going to treat all 13 kids equally. You're not going to spend time with all 13 kids equally. It's not going to happen. That's why he's picked one kid. He's already kind of got a favorite. And he's going to have favorites in terms of which, baby mama that he loves the most. I don't know which one it is. But I want you to understand, like, he's tearing apart our country. He's supposedly running multiple companies. He's got all these children, like he's got all this on the plate, and he's got time to play video games, etc. Like, I think you should be able to figure out that he's actually ends up not being good at any of this stuff. So this all ends up being just about and serving the team on the whole. It's actually frankly insane. But you guys see it, and I just want to stand together, pointing out together. This is what John says from our community. John says, Elon is not smart and nowhere to team, right? I can see it too. They fired so many talented career workers, and that now left the door open for hostile foreign actors to infiltrate the various government agencies by billing people. All applicants will have to do the same. How much they adore Trump and or Elon, and they are in. The only ones who, quote, get it, as Trump states at the end of your post, are the brainwashed, obsequious MAGA cult members. Talk about a national security nightmare.
Zelensky said Ukraine can never accept peace talks without Kyiv's involvement, a message meant for President Trump. He called a meeting between Trump and Putin without the presence of Ukrainians or Europeans dangerous.
Some in Europe may be frustrated with Brussels, but let's be clear. If not Brussels, then Moscow. It's your decision.
Zelensky also took questions from our own Christian Almanzar, messages from Washington, and also
Do you understand what the next is?
If you were full of booze,
Yes.
you'd be more.
Which is, I think, to my mind, they have prepared an atmosphere for their trial. Which will be for the dialogue between Trump and Putin. And I think this is up to them. Right? They can discuss technical points, but not about that. And that's why, in this case, especially in this case, I think it's a little bit dangerous. That's why I sent it to the president and to talk more with his people, with his teams. And yesterday, as you said, we had a good conversation, and I think that I opened some new details for.
Yes. Prestige 10.
security chief to new arrivals. Could have used you sooner, but welcome just the same. I'm in the mansion. Command center.
Hold up.
Injured, but intact. Most everyone else is... well, you've got eyes.
Everything I say going forward here is alleged, so if I forget to say alleged 83 times going forward, I mean allegedly every time I say any of this allegedly. Well, Elon Musk just knocked up an e-girl, allegedly former e-girl, and conservatives cheer him on. And I know Elon Musk is not conservative, he's never professed to be, and I think at this point he's just basically got a, if we're going to sleep together, I don't have a pull-in or a pull-out method. I have a pull-in method, much like you pulling into your driveway. So he's got the world's weakest pull-out method, but the guy can't afford child support. I bet he has a form letter that he has them all signed saying, if we're going to do this, here's what we are going to agree to. I'll pay you $500,000 a year for the rest of your life. And the women are like, sweet, I'll sign that. No duress or anything on that, baby. He's got so much money he can afford to do that. But so it's not about Elon Musk's actions, although I'm not thrilled that he's out there dropping kids in a bunch of single moms, and now there's 5 single moms and 13 kids. Because he is in part of their lives still. I mean, I see him with X and some of the other ones. So it's less about that, and it's more about the conservative reaction to it, which is, you think conservatives would be, oh, great, thanks. Another single mom. Another woman that just got cashed out for having a kid with a rich dude. This is actually a post from Elon Musk just a couple of weeks ago. Freckled Liberty said, "Men, is this true?" It's an image of the most addictive drug known to mankind, and it's a little package with a little woman in there that's kind of sexy, and it says crazy weed. And Elon Musk says, yeah. And at this point, he just had the kid with Ashley St. Clair. So if you don't know who Ashley St. Clair is, she's been on trigonometry. She has her own, I think she has her own videos and podcasts. She's a media darling, and she's a right-wing darling, and now she always talks about single motherhood and how bad feminism is and everything else. And then she comes out, and she's already a single mom. She's already a single mom, has been for several years. And now she's a single mom to another kid. Even though now she rails against feminism, they're all grifters. Every single one of them is a grifter. But it's the reaction to this, and not everybody was on board. There's some people that actually still have credibility and feelings about this, but this is from Jack Poso, which surprised me. Here's her statement. Now, if you don't know who Jack Poso is, he is one of the biggest Trump supporters. He's also very conservative. He's Catholic. He's a veteran Navy intel officer. He's got 3 million followers on X, and he's got millions of followers on YouTube. Her announcement, she says, 5 months ago, I welcomed a new baby into the world. Elon Musk is the father. I have not previously disclosed this to protect our child's privacy and safety, but in recent days, it has become clear that tabloid media intends to do so regardless of the harm it caused. I intend to allow our child to grow into a normal and safe environment. Pause. Normal and safe environment would be father in the home, father being returning to the home nightly, not being on a jet, flittering about the world, and just writing checks to the kid. So this is not normal and or safe. First, she says, for that reason, I ask the media honor its privacy and refrain from invasive reporting. I respect that much. I respect it. But Jack Poso says, God bless you and your family, Ash. This isn't a family. This isn't it's a very dysfunctional family.
And I'm really glad, let me just say this, I'm really glad she didn't delete the kid. I am glad about that. I'm glad she decided to go through it, but why would she delete it? It's a cash cow. It is literally, like, it is a cash register machine for the rest of her life, monthly, yearly. It's a cash cow. And the thing that blows me away is this is how, this proves our point on men's channels when we say women always have bailings. This woman is what I like to call aggressively mid. Who is this chick anyway? Sex laptop. Ashley St. Clair's passed under scrutiny after revealing Elon Musk's fathered her child. Now, again, you could say, man, she's kind of good looking. This is where you guys start getting messed up a little bit because there's so many women today that are unattractive. Ashley St. Clair, author and conservative figure, recently revealed she gave birth to Elon Musk's 13th child 5 months ago. How conservative is she, being a mother of two, that rails against feminism and rails against single mothers and has yet become a single mother for the second time? I'm just saying. Conservatives are such grifters. They really are. That's why so many times I can come out and say, oh, I support Trump and I support this and that. And then you gotta tear conservatives into an asshole because they're not really conservative. They're kind of grifters like everybody else. In a post shared on Valentine's Day, St. Clair confirmed Musk was the father of their kid. Blah, blah, blah. She wrote this. I already read it. However, following her revelation, St. Clair's past has come under scrutiny. Social media users quickly began circulating allegations claiming that St. Clair previously posted explicit content under the name Sex Laptop. And they pull up a lot of her old videos, many of which supposedly were made under the age of 18. These claims suggest that she shared spicy material and engaged in racially charged content online, including fetishizing black men. I have a screenshot of that. This is Ash at Sex Laptop. You'll see. And here's more circulating, and this is her face. I'm sorry, but this is her face. And if I zoom in here and put it over on her face, this is her without makeup and without doing her eyebrows and all the rest of it. That is a very mid woman. Very, very mid. Oof. Mid. That's her. And she even writes in this video, Ashley Nicole, parentheses, Sex Laptop, from 2014. Now, if you look at the date and the age of what she says her actual age is, you say, wait a minute. That means that she wasn't able to do that legally. This is somebody posting it from just the other day. Now y'all know how and why Ashley St. Clair, formerly known under a previous... this is all alleged.
Because developing late last night, 14 states' attorneys general have hit a roadblock in their efforts to stop Elon Musk and Doge. The attorneys general argued that Trump violated the appointments clause of the Constitution by creating Doge, an unofficial government agency without congressional approval, and by granting Musk sweeping powers without seeking the advice and consent of the Senate. But federal judge Tanya Chutkan didn't seem convinced that the states showed enough evidence of imminent harm. At one point, Chutkan told a lawyer from the Maryland Attorney General's office, quote, "You're essentially asking me to shut down the government." The lawyer replied, "We're asking you to shut down a constitutional violation that we haven't seen in this country." Joining us now, Maryland Attorney General Anthony Brown. Welcome.
General Brown, good morning to you. Where do you go from here on that particular effort?
So we're in court in the District of Columbia. Arguments yesterday. All of these arguments are tough. These are tough cases. We're filing proposed orders today. Look, what we're alleging is that Elon Musk and his sort of designation as some super employee violates the appointments clause. The Constitution says if you're going to wield that kind of power as a federal official, you've got to be properly vetted and go through a confirmation process with the United States Senate. He's done none of that. He's got access to financial data, personal information. It's dangerous. So we're in court. We're going to propose an order, and it was a difficult hearing yesterday, but we'll continue pursuing it, propose an order, get a good result, and continue litigating this issue.
Let's read what
Judge Chutkin said, because it is, she seemed to express a lot of skepticism yesterday, and this is reporting from yesterday. Judge Chutkin repeatedly questioned what imminent harm the states were facing from Musk and Doge's work that would warrant an incredibly broad temporary restraining order. She also said that plaintiffs' use of words like perhaps and may when describing how states could be harmed by Doge's actions undercut their argument that irreversible harm was imminent. You're saying I should tell Doge and their officials to stop what they're doing because we don't know what they're doing, she said. And this is from Daniel Barnes of NBC News. So what is your take on this, General Brown? Are you all going to come back and retool your argument to narrow it a little more, your motion here? Or do you believe that the broadness of the suit that you all have brought is warranted?
If it's warranted, broad nature of the suit, we're going to be responsive to the judge's request. But look, in Maryland alone, the central payment system in the U.S. Treasury sends $11 billion to the state of Maryland, $50 billion to the residents of Maryland. We've seen Elon Musk go literally into federal agencies, telling them to shut down without using the proper procedures and protocol. So this is a dangerous person in a very important position. So we're saying to the judge, we've got to stop this. And as a minimum, right, access to the central payment system, the ability to go into agencies, because that does have direct harm on Marylanders and residents throughout the country.
General, this reminds me so much of situations in which you bring concern, evidence, facts to an argument, to a case, and folks say, well, essentially, we got to wait till something bad happens before we do something, which is why I think a lot of folks out here are beginning to express, as our friend Ellen Stahl we were talking about before, that the courts are not going to save us in this.
All right, as I've said many times before, I will report to you what I see, not what I would like to see. I will tell you the reality as I believe it to be, rather than I would wish it to be. And we have entered an era so dystopian in this second presidential term of Donald Trump that we have to call it what it is. And it appears as though Elon Musk is functionally in charge of the American government at this time. This is not another, Trump's a puppet hypothesis. We are not in a subtle, behind the scenes through corporate influence that we can't really define, or some kind of puppet masters who we can never really name. Elon Musk appears to be openly running the show. How do we know? We know because it's all happening in public. Donald Trump has been signing executive orders that might as well have been drafted in Elon Musk's Twitter reply. We've got Doge, this made-up acronym for a real, truly terrifying thing, where Elon Musk puts his own personal operatives, maybe we call them political commissars, puts them inside federal agencies, their job being to fire and hire and downsize. It's all happening under Elon Musk's command. And there is so much more to it. So let's break it down. Under Donald Trump's Doge, the unelected loyalist Elon Musk has unelected loyalists to him making decisions about funding and programs, and they've got the keys to the castle, they've got the keys to everything. They can block hires, they can decide who gets fired, they can dictate the size and shape of agencies. And because Elon Musk is at the top of Doge, even Vivek Ramaswamy, it was obvious. You can't have two egos like that at the top. Trump clearly preferred Elon. Vivek quietly went away, saying everything's absolutely perfect. I'm just not going to be a part of this anymore. It really does appear as though Elon Musk and not Donald Trump are actually calling the shots here. This is not a minor advisory role. These Doge operatives aren't just consultants. They are overriding department heads on staffing. And the only way an agency can hire someone Musk's people don't approve of is if the agency had personally intervened, which, let's be real, most aren't going to, because they don't want to be next on the chopping block as likely to get fired. Trump's new downsizing rule is for every 4 federal employees who leave, only 1 gets hired back. So this is all calculated. It's to gut the federal government from the inside. And if you thought Trump's first term was a disaster for properly staffing government departments, Elon Musk's second-term agenda is like starvation-level austerity, except not for the billionaires, only for the regular people who rely on things like their wages, functioning infrastructure, environmental protections, regulatory oversight. And if you step back for a second and say, David, you're right, 4 years ago, 8 years ago, 12 years ago, Elon Musk in the Oval Office explaining what's going on while the actual president sits aside, we wouldn't have expected that. But the signs have really been everywhere, because Elon Musk and other billionaires have been methodically inserting themselves into government decision-making for years, initially in more subtle ways. Then Elon takes over Twitter, turns it into this unmoderated pipeline for far-right propaganda, worms his way into direct access to Trump by dumping in about $270 million for the campaign. And now he gets to do whatever he wants. He can disregard regulatory standards if it's convenient for companies he owns, or secure government subsidies for businesses, and he is staffing the federal government. He's already rewired American political discourse by controlling what was one of the most influential online platforms, I don't know if it still is, where he would be boosting conspiracies and undermining democracy, playing footsie with authoritarian regimes, and he brands himself as some kind of free speech absolutist, but he's not. He now has moved beyond controlling speech. He's controlling government. He's controlling the budget. He's controlling policy. And that's the part that Trump's base doesn't really want to admit. Trump is increasingly just a figurehead. He's signing what's put in front of him.
And in other Elon Musk news, as if we needed any more, but according to a new report from The Lever, when Donald Trump carried out his recent midnight massacre, firing the inspectors general from multiple different government agencies, he also managed to do a massive favor for his good buddy, Elon Musk, who of course dumped $288 million into the presidential election. By firing these inspectors general, Donald Trump fired 5 of them who either had previously investigated Elon Musk or were in the process of investigating Elon Musk. Here is what The Lever reported. At the Department of Agriculture, where the Inspector General's office was probing alleged animal abuse at Musk's brain implant company Neuralink, Inspector General and 22-year USDA veteran Phyllis Fong was escorted out of her office by security guards last Monday. Department of Defense Inspector General Robert Storch was fired just months after he reportedly opened a review into repeated failures by Musk and his rocket company SpaceX to properly disclose their contact with foreign leaders. The Department of Transportation, which oversees the National Transportation Safety Board, had its Inspector General fired as safety regulators oversaw several open probes into Tesla, which of course is his electric vehicle company, over its remote and self-driving vehicles. The same goes for the Environmental Protection Agency, where investigators have settled multiple lawsuits with Tesla in recent years over Clean Air Act and hazardous waste law violations. Trump also fired the Inspector General at the Department of Labor, which oversees the National Labor Relations Board. The board has 17 open investigations against Musk's companies, Tesla and SpaceX, for alleged unfair labor practices, safety violations, and discriminatory work practices. With those inspectors general being fired, likely illegally, because you have to give Congress a 30 days notice if you plan to remove these people, which Trump obviously did not, because he hadn't even been in office for 30 days yet. But with these firings, these investigations are likely dead. Because these inspectors general are not going to be replaced by people who are going to come in there guns blazing and just investigate all this corporate malfeasance. God, no. These are individuals that are going to come in and make sure that we're not doing DEI at the EPA or at the National Transportation Safety Board or in the Labor Department. All of these investigations into Elon Musk, investigations that happened because of horrific reports given to the federal government, are likely gone. So that $288 million that Elon Musk spent helping Donald Trump buy the 2024 election, it paid dividends for him. I mean, he has already seen his net worth in general skyrocket by billions of dollars since Donald Trump won. He's doing better than ever, right? And now, on top of having even more money than he already had, he doesn't have to worry about any kind of criminal fines or penalties because those investigations are not coming back. Pac-Man, don't forget, you can also find me on my 2 YouTube channels, both Fair and Balanced and Ring of Fire, youtube.com/The Ring of Fire, youtube.com/Fair and Balanced.
It was for Elon Musk and Doge, who are wasting no time in their efforts to overhaul the federal government. And the federal judge ruled Doge can keep its access to data at the Department of Labor and other agencies, rejecting labor unions' attempt to shut down that access. But a judge has barred Musk and Doge from accessing Treasury data for now. Joining us now, CNN senior legal analyst and former state and federal prosecutor, Ali Honig, and CNN senior political analyst, Ron Brownstein. Ali, I want to start with you. Elon and Doge, they are temporarily blocked from accessing this Treasury data. Do you think that the judge will make this hold permanent?
Well, Paula, there has been a bit of a sea change happening over the last several days, which is this. In the beginning, virtually all of these lawsuits challenging Donald Trump's efforts and Elon Musk's efforts to downsize the government were successful. Basically, all of the courts that hear these cases at least put temporary holds on the Trump administration. But slowly, including over the last 2-3 days, we've seen some of those holds come off. We've seen courts start to rule in favor, in some cases, of Trump and Elon Musk. And the reason, broadly speaking, is it's not the case that federal employees have some sacrosanct, perpetual right to remain employed forever. And it's also not the case that Elon Musk has zero ability to access information. He's been someone who's appointed by the president to do a certain job. With certain restraints, he can access certain information. So we're starting to see the tide turn right now. A judge, for example, has declined to put the buyout plan on hold. Another judge just yesterday, a Democratic appointed judge, Judge Reyes, forcefully rejected an effort by the fired inspectors general to get their jobs back. So it's not quite as simple as, well, these people are entitled to jobs and they do good work. And I think more and more of the courts are slowly coming around to Donald Trump's position on these cases.
You know, Ron, I think what's interesting about the access to Treasury data is this has people worked up, right? Because this is also how federal employees are paid, Social Security, disability. Musk and Trump don't really seem moved by court losses necessarily. But do you think that if constituents and the populace gets too worked up about this, do you think political pressure might prompt them to reverse course on this?
Well, I think, the Treasury data.
Elon Musk, I hate to admit it, but you did it. Tesla is, in fact, number one, with the highest fatal accident rate among all car brands in America. It's not a prestigious award. I never said that it was. It's kind of a rough one, actually. And it's actually even worse than it sounds. Being number one for highest fatal accident rate isn't the worst that this gets. So this is all according to a recent IC Cars study that analyzed data from the U.S. Fatality Analysis Reporting System, which I have to imagine is being defunded right now, thanks to this reporting. Anyway, what they did was they looked at model year cars from 2018 to 2022, and they focused on crashes between 2017 and 2022 that resulted in occupant fatalities. Tesla vehicles had a fatal crash rate of 5.6 per billion miles driven. Kia was second with 5.5. Buick was number 3 with 4.8. Now, on average, cars in America were at 2.8 per billion vehicle miles driven, and that's the worst that it sounds I was referencing. It's not just that they're worst, it's that the average is half the amount of Tesla. This is the sort of thing that I feel like should be all over the news. How is, our business network's not focusing on this? That you're twice as likely as average to be in a fatal accident? And by the way, they may not cover it, but Musk could at least update this tweet where he says Teslas are the safest cars on the road, but most people don't know that. I think they should know the results of this study, actually. Now, to be fair, it isn't necessarily just the cars. It isn't necessarily that the cars are naturally less safe. It could also be something about the sort of people who drive the cars, which many are perfectly lovely, normal people, but apparently Tesla drivers have more incidents, accidents, DUIs, speeding, and citations per 1,000 drivers than most other cars. You can see Subaru, for instance, has like 4 less incidents per 1,000 drivers than Tesla. So they not only have the highest fatal accident rate, they also have the highest negative driving incident rate. So maybe it's something about that. Maybe they're just trusting the self-driving features that Elon Musk has been willfully, knowingly lying about for literally years so that he can make a buck off of people, and maybe they die as a result of it. And so regardless, I don't know the exact explanation for this, Sharon, but it doesn't look good. And there should be an investigation. Now, there won't, because Elon Musk is now in a position to shut down any agency that actually looks into or reports on this information. That's how this corrupt administration actually works. But for the safety of people, I do think that there should be an investigation. What do you think?
Yeah, and then when that investigation's launched, it's going to be shut right down. But at this point, we're talking a lot about Elon Musk, who didn't get one vote. And again, every time I think of him doing that salute or raising his hands, I see his milky belly. And I just cannot, it's so gross. But here's the thing. This is supposedly our country, and maybe, someone correct me, maybe I am naive, okay, at this advanced age. But where are people going to storm things like they did with bear spray and rifling through Nancy Pelosi's desk? Over nothing, by the way. It was not rigged. He lost, okay? And Joe Biden, who stayed in his basement for the whole campaign, actually kicked his butt. When are the people who aren't corrupt, like everyday Americans, going to just say, you know what? This is ours. We're going to take it back. We're going there, and we're not leaving. He can't. Well, I mean, he probably can get Tulsi Gabbard and the rest of them to open fire or spray us or do something. But we have to fight back instead of just taking it and going on with our lives. Our lives are not going to continue as we know them. And by the way, for some of us, it hasn't been that great lately. It hasn't been that great for a couple of years for people.
I know. There have been a lot of protests. We'll see. Hopefully a lot of people run for office. Hopefully the midterms are an absolute bloodbath for them politically. That's typically how it works politically, assuming we get to have fair elections.
I'm sorry for interrupting you. Back to Hakeem Jeffries and company. If they don't want to do it, great. Raise your money, sit back for 4 years. But since it's, irreparable and nothing can be done, why not let AOC have a go at it? Why not let them do it, and then when they fail, or if they fail, you can say that we tried. Why not have some new blood and follow them and take them on for a minute? That's the part that you're not going to do anything, and you won't let anybody else do anything.
Yeah. Yeah, and of course, Hakeem Jeffries cares more about his power and his ability to fundraise than he does about the future of either the Democratic Party or the country. And so, until they get booted from the party, I'm in favor of them conducting their own little coup. The Democratic Party. AOC, Jasmine Crockett, some others should get together and say, our leadership has abdicated their responsibility, what our voters want us to do in this time, so we are now designating ourselves, we are the official spokespeople for this party. And we'll see what the people think. I think I know where the people will side, but let's see that. And if some of the other centrists or whatever want to get on board, that want to have a future in the party, Pete Buttigieg, wants to have a future, then he can support that coup. But I would love to see that because something needs to happen.
Coups are in.
Yeah. And by the way, I know that it's pointless to even talk to the board of Tesla because they're all just...
Welcome, everybody. We are quickly learning why former President Joe Biden did pardon people on his way out of office. We are learning why, thanks to Attorney General Pam Bondi, who yesterday announced a number of new lawsuits. She calls it filing charges. It's not even clear she knows what she's doing, but that's a whole different story. Do any of these Trump people know what they're doing? But the bigger picture is that this is likely only the beginning. Now, let me set the stage for you. Donald Trump's Attorney General Pam Bondi was selected sort of as a backup candidate after after the nomination of Matt Gaetz to that office completely imploded thanks to not only his lack of qualification, which Pam Bondi shares, but also the cartoonish nature of allegations against him regarding sex trafficking underage girls and so many other things. So, as I said at the time, Pam Bondi, or whoever Trump was likely to choose to replace Gaetz, they were likely to be less cartoonishly unqualified, but still unqualified, and still doormat loyalists. Why do I call them doormat? Because they lay down and get walked all over by Trump as if they were a doormat to Donald Trump's bathroom or wherever. And indeed, that is what Pam Bondi is. This is the same Pam Bondi, former Attorney General of Florida, who once famously accepted a donation from Donald Trump and then said, you know what, I'm not going to open up an investigation into Trump University. She has now announced that the Department of Justice is suing the state of New York. The reason? Allegedly failing to enforce immigration laws. Here she explains it. This is a lawsuit targeting New York Governor Kathy Hochul, State Attorney General Letitia James, who of course went after Trump, the state's Department of Motor Vehicles for issuing licenses to undocumented immigrants, which, by the way, makes a lot of sense, and I'll talk about that in a moment. The lawsuit was filed in Albany County Federal Court. Bondi says this is the new DOJ. You don't have to read between the lines to realize this is only the beginning.
I was in the West Wing swearing in Tulsi Gabbard, and so I just came straight back here. So thanks for being patient with us with the delay. We're here today because we have filed charges against the state of New York. We have filed charges against Kathy Hochul. We have filed charges against Letitia James and Mark Schroeder.
Now, I have to just mention, I don't know that she has filed charges. Is a lawsuit considered charges? Is it a legal semantic question? I'm not even sure she knows what she's saying, but forget about that. You always have to give them that they don't know what they're talking about.
Who is with DMV. This is a new DOJ, and we are taking steps to protect Americans, American citizens, and angel moms, like the mom standing right behind me, who you're going to hear from in a moment.
Okay, so what is this about? At the center of this lawsuit, or charges, as she describes, is New York's Green Light Law. And that is a law that allows undocumented immigrants to get a driver's license. And the law specifically says the DMV cannot share immigration status with federal authorities. And Bondi says that puts law enforcement officers at risk, saying if these officers pull someone over, don't know whether that person is documented or undocumented, they don't know who they're dealing with, they are now at risk. And this is part of the attack on, they love to use the term sanctuary cities, states, and organizations, but much of what it is we are going to do our duty. We are not going to go out of our way to assist federal authorities. And if you understand states' rights, then you can't possibly argue with the legality of that. They want to pretend that this is a lawsuit over immigration enforcement, but it's not. It's really a political statement. They're saying we're going after New York. They're also suing Illinois. They're sending a message to the base, which is we are tough on immigration in the sense of we are going to target places that we see as liberal or left-wing strongholds. But in practice, what this is the suspension of the rule of law in favor of an authoritarian, dictatorial regime. Everyone who has ever spoken out against the regime is potentially going to be the subject of persecution. Does the David Pakman show need to worry? Our little cohort of progressive media outlets, we've all been texting saying, is it likely we will be targeted or not? I've gotten emails from people saying, David, you do need to worry. Just folks like you, people in the audience who say it's abundantly clear that there is that they are going to target folks like you. I don't doubt that they would love to. My hope is that we're just small enough potatoes that they won't get to us. But Pam Bondi is making it clear that this is only the beginning. She's hinting that other so-called sanctuary states and sanctuary cities could be facing similar legal actions. She says they need to comply with the administration's policies, and so on and so forth. The practical question is whether these lawsuits will succeed. because legal experts are looking at the substance of the lawsuits and pointing out immigration enforcement is primarily a federal responsibility. The Supreme Court has repeatedly ruled states cannot be forced to assist federal authorities in enforcing immigration policy. So there's all these layers. We know that these lawsuits aren't really about enforcing immigration policy. They're about political retribution against perceived blue states, blue cities, people who went after Donald Trump for reasons that were based in fact and valid. Layer number two is that they want to argue the states are responsible for anything bad that happens if they don't assist federal authorities. Well, what the Supreme Court has held is that states have no legal responsibility to do so because immigration enforcement is, at its core, a federal function. You can't, as the federal government, say, even though this is exclusively within our purview, we are going to hold cities and states accountable because we weren't able to do our jobs the right way, the way we wanted to, the way we otherwise would have been able to do. The Supreme Court has said they have no responsibility to do that. So Bondi's lawsuit is clearly more about politics and optics than it is about policy or enforcement. But the critical thing is you have to remember, even frivolous lawsuits, even baseless lawsuits, even lawsuits that are ultimately dismissed can still completely ruin your life. And that's exactly what Pam Bondi is trying to do. Well, I wrote a book after a long journey and a ton of work. I am really thrilled with how it turned out, and I hope you'll read it. The book is called The Echo Machine. And in a nutshell, it looks at how American politics got so broken, who has all...
Donald Trump tries to portray himself as a phony man of the people, as somebody leading a populist movement. He and his family have already pocketed over $200 million just since the election on the backs of his presidency. I'm Michael Popak. You're on the Midas Touch Network and Legal AF. Let's get down to the numbers. This is the unholy grift that we're watching, almost like a bank robbery in plain sight. Ty Cobb, a lawyer for Donald Trump, says that Donald Trump is motivated right now by only two qualities, by only two features, either greed or revenge. And sometimes we see them combine in his negotiating strategy against companies where he's trying to extract or extort large settlements that go to his family. Everything I'm going to talk about on this particular hot take, everything, is going to be about monies that either Donald Trump, Melania, or Donald Trump's adult children have obtained since November the 5th, just to keep the timeline straight. So let's get to it. Michael Popak here. You're on Legal AF and Midas Touch. Let's start with the fact that, of course, I agree with Ty Cobb. Everything we're seeing is either vengeance or greed, right? And so these are the sins that animate Donald Trump at the present time. Let's go through the money first. Let's go through the settlements that he's reached, including with Elon Musk's own company. Talk about a shell game. Start with Elon Musk. Elon Musk, who's been sued a half a dozen times already, and his Doge, and is in federal courts to remove him effectively from the government, from serving as the co-president. We said in November it looked like there were going to be two co-presidents with Donald Trump, Elon Musk and RFK Jr., and that's what we're watching. Elon Musk spent $250 million to buy a presidency. His own money. He invested $250 million. Why? Why not? Because he's doubled his wealth in that amount of time. He went from $250 billion of wealth at the time of the election to almost $500 billion now in February. That's a pretty good return on an investment. In return, he got control over the government and its regulators, all of whom have been the bane of his existence for a long, long time. Now there's reports that Elon Musk, who now controls X, used to be Twitter, is going to settle with Donald Trump, right, the guy he works for, to pay him $10 million. In broad daylight, Elon Musk in the government and his company X is going to pay Donald Trump $10 million to compensate Donald Trump for a failed lawsuit that Donald Trump had already lost at the trial court level, and that was up on appeal, unlikely to be reversed. So a losing case. Elon Musk decided to put $10 million directly into Donald Trump's pocket, the guy that he works for, right? I thought they were all supposed to be working for us. I thought they're all supposed to be in public service. So when have we ever heard in the history of America one employee paying the boss, who's the president of the United States, $10 million, and to settle a case that is a failed case for Donald Trump? The case got dismissed by the trial court level, and it wasn't going to likely be revived at the Ninth Circuit. I've been before the Ninth Circuit. Very difficult to win an appeal at the Ninth Circuit. So you got that $10 million. You've got Meta, Facebook, paid Donald Trump $25 million on a lawsuit. It was also just sort of languishing around. This is all because Donald Trump was spreading lies and disinformation and misinformation on his social media platforms, including through Jan 6th and during Jan 6th, to foment discontent, to create more of a firestorm attacking the Capitol. And so he was deplatformed, taken off these platforms. So now, because he's the president, and these people are scared and they're worried about their own dollars, that's why they're all lined up like toadies, like bootlickers at the inauguration, one next to each other, in a section that's usually reserved for family of Donald Trump. It was all the tech bros. So you have $10 million Elon Musk handing it off to his boss. You've got $25 million for Meta, and then you've got the also social media platforms. In addition to that, Melania's BS documentary that nobody wanted. Three of the major media companies didn't even bid on it. None. Disney only wanted distribution rights. They offered 15. Everybody else, like Paramount and everybody else, all the streaming services, they offered like 5. And lo and behold, Amazon and Jeff Bezos, they buy it for $40 million. Okay? The next bid was 15. So go to 16. No. The delta between 15 and 40, right? That's the bribe. That's the bribe. That's Jeff Bezos, who's friends with Ivanka and Jared and live next to them in Miami and party with them in Aspen, wanting to get in the good graces of the Trump administration. So they overpay for Melania. That delta between what is proper market value and what they actually paid, that's bribe. That's $40 million. So let's keep doing the math. You got 40 million, 25 million, and 15 million, and 10 million. That's almost $100 million right there. Now, another $100 million was earned by Trump in selling his phony meme Trump coins.
The New York Deli, a 50-year-old institution in Houston, Texas, says they are currently losing $10,000 to $12,000 a month due to these high prices. Co-owners Michael Saigon and Rihanna Sherman join me right now. Michael and Rihanna, thanks so much for being here. How would you assess the price of eggs right now?
So, right before COVID, we were paying on average about $30, $35 a case. Right now, we're paying upwards of $130 a case, which is not sustainable. In the restaurant business, usually, inventory will go up, but it goes right back down. And we're not seeing any decrease in pricing. We're only seeing it go up $4 or $5 a case week over week.
So, Rihanna, is the majority of your money now being spent on eggs?
It really is. A good chunk of our money is being spent on eggs right now. And, a lot of establishments, a lot of restaurants have been increasing their price of eggs. As you mentioned, we are a 50-year-old establishment in Houston, and we have a lot of elderly customers. We have a lot of multi-generational customers. So we are not at that point yet in raising our prices. However, as Michael mentioned, this is not sustainable, and we've heard rumors that it could go on throughout the course of this entire year. If that's the case, we may have to reassess.
So Michael, what kind of an increase are you considering? I mean, you haven't raised prices yet, but you're trying to be sensitive to the clientele. What are you going to do?
So we're staying tight right now. We are not planning to raise prices. We're a small business. A lot of our clientele are loyal, coming on us for generations, and we don't want to spike the price, for a local business like ourselves. We got through COVID. Now we're dealing with inflation. Now we're dealing with inflation, aka the bird flu, and we don't know what's going to happen with tariffs. Prices could continue going higher, And, from our distributors, we're being told, it could get up to the 150s. It's, we won't have any relief this year, is what I'm being told. We buy hundreds of cases a week, and the difference of $1, $2 up and down, which is going up $5 a week or $6 a week, it hurts. We're taking, like you said, a $10,000 hit a month. It just doesn't work. When chicken prices triple during inflation, chicken's not in everything. Eggs as a bakery is the main ingredient in every recipe we have.
That's a great point. So, Brianna, you're basically saying you're losing money on all egg meals.
We are, as Michael mentioned, at our New York Deli, our top selling item is our 2-egg special. And then next to that is our omelets and our egg mitt sandwiches. So everything has eggs. And then we have 2 fully stocked bakeries, which I would say 90% of the products have eggs in them.
Sure, of course.
So
Makes sense.
again, we're losing on that end, but our other operations are luckily covering the call, which is why we are fortunate not to have to raise our prices just yet.
All right. Well, we'll be watching as you are right now eating the higher cost. Good to see you both. Thank you so much, Michael and Rihanna.
You too. Thank you so much.
To scrap. Joining me now is Texas Congressman Pat Fallon. Thank you so much for being here. You are on the House Oversight DOJ Subcommittee. You are also on the Armed Services and recently named on the Intelligence Committees. So we've got a lot to get to. I want to get your take on the DOJ cuts and where specifically you see the most waste and fraud.
Well, Brad, thank you for having me. And, over the last 20 years, and this is according to the federal government themselves, there's been about $2.7 trillion with a T in waste, $764 billion just under Joe Biden. $250 billion were paid to folks that were not eligible for COVID benefits, and we only clawed back $5 billion of it. So there's a massive amount of savings all over the federal government, but specifically to your question, Medicaid, about 20% of that is fraud, waste, and abuse, and we spend hundreds of billions of dollars, actually, into the trillions of dollars. So there's massive savings, and the American taxpayer is finally going to get a bang for the buck because for decades people have been talking about this, but now finally we have a president that's doing something about it.
Congressman, let me ask you about defense spending. You're on the Armed Services Committee. First, President Trump said he wants to increase defense spending. You're all talking about $125 billion for the reconciliation package. And then the president said he's going to be talking to Russia and China about denuclearization, and he wants to cut defense spending in half. Which is it?
Well, I think what the president's saying is we're going to look at one of the needs for the United States and for our security, vis-a-vis security. We're going to spend what we need to in that regard. He can also reduce the budget in 2 ways. One, with efficiencies, because there are some weapons programs, and there's certainly some inefficiencies in the Pentagon. But that's not going to jeopardize security, and our military, quite frankly, will go stronger. We'll grow stronger with those kind of, to really do self-auditing, quite honestly. But what he's also talking about is if China and if Russia will work with us and reduce their nuclear stockpiles and also maybe some of their weapon systems, we have some kind of unilateral agreement between, really amongst the 3 of us, then we can see some savings as well. I think that's what he's talking about.
Well, so there are still plans then for a potential Iron Dome around America and the potential for spawning even more spending on modernization of the military. Is that right?
Well, yeah, it's one of those, you take one step, you invest in the new weapons programs that are leaner. And so you might see a spike in the short term, but then overall, you're not going to cut the budget in half, the military budget in half in a year. I think that's what he's saying is maybe it'll go down the line. But also, Russia, our competitors, Russia and China, would have to agree, or that's certainly not. I don't think that's feasible.
So, look, we're talking about these cuts at the same time that you and your colleagues are coming up with a budget reconciliation bill that's singular, one chip.
Let's bring in House Ways and Means Committee member, Texas Congresswoman Beth Van Daan. Congresswoman, terrific to see. Not only is the IRS responsible for collecting revenue, the IRS is responsible for more than 1/3 of improper payments in the earned income tax credit going out the door. 1/3 of improper payments in the education tax credit, 15% of improper payments going out the door in the refundable child tax credit, a quarter for the Obamacare premium tax credit. The IRS is broken, but the Democrats are upset about
You talked a bit about Doge. Elon Musk is currently a, quote, special government employee who also owns companies that have billions of dollars in federal contracts. You said earlier this week that he has abided by all applicable federal laws, but what steps is the Trump administration taking to address that conflict of interest?
The president was already asked and answered this question this week, and he said if Elon Musk comes across a conflict of interest with the contracts and the funding that Doge is overseeing, then Elon will excuse himself from those contracts. And he has, again, abided by all applicable laws.
Yeah, Elon Musk also, by the way, has not undergone a background check or has security clearance or literally any of the other stuff that MAGA would demand of every single person that works in a Democratic administration. So just be very clear.
With a wide-ranging rebuke of Europe from US Vice President J.D. Vance still ringing in their ears, the continent leaders gathered for the second day of the Munich Security Conference. Taking center stage, Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky struck a friendlier tone, but had a stark warning.
Many leaders have talked about Europe that needs its own military, an army of Europe. I really believe that time has come. The armed forces of Europe must be created.
With admission to NATO now unlikely, but EU membership still possible, Zelensky made his pitch.
Without Ukraine's army, Europe's armies will not be enough to stop Russia. It's reality for today. Only our army in Europe has real, modern battlefield experience.
The idea of a European army has been debated for decades, but questions over how it would operate and the command structure have never been fully resolved. After meeting US counterpart Marco Rubio, Canada's foreign minister had this to say on the prospect of Ukrainian peace talks.
There was a clear understanding that we need to make sure that Ukrainian voices are at the table, that Europe and Canada is at the table, because ultimately it is also about Ukraine's security, but it's also about the Euro-Atlantic security.
Vance departed last night, and today several European leaders criticized his attacks on the health of European democracies and his meeting with the leader of Germany's far-right AfD party. For the new boss of NATO, former Dutch Prime Minister Mark Rutte, it's clear the Trump administration's insistence on boosting defense spending is right.
There is an absolute commitment of the US, including this administration, to NATO, but also an expectation that on the European side we have to step up, we have to spend more, and they're right. We are not spending enough.
G7 foreign ministers will meet in Quebec next month. Those fighting on the front lines in Ukraine will be hoping for more unified international support after a week of mixed signals from the new Trump administration. Vincent McAviney, Global News, London.
At the end of the day, this government's going to shrink. This president was elected to reduce the size of government. He's allowed to.
Joining me now from Munich is former U.S. Trade Representative and Council on Foreign Relations, President Michael Froman. Michael, so glad to have you here. So let's talk about whether you think President Trump's intended effect is to have the so-called reciprocal action force other countries to reduce their tariffs on the U.S., or could it have the opposite effect, that they increase their tariffs and then it just goes up the chain?
Well, I think that's the right question, because he certainly has announced tariffs first and foremost as a tool of leverage to get other countries to come to the table and to negotiate. And so by announcing a reciprocal trade program, tariff program, what he's signaling to other countries is, if you've got a trade deficit with us and your tariffs on our products are higher than our tariffs on yours, then there's going to be a problem. We're going to raise our tariffs to your level unless we can reach an accommodation. For some countries, that might lead them to reduce their tariffs. For others, though, there's a lot of pushback saying these were the negotiated rates. This was all part of an international agreement. And if the U.S. is going to unilaterally break its agreement by raising tariffs, other countries will retaliate and raise tariffs as well. And that could create a downward spiral.
So here's what President Trump said about the impact of tariffs on consumers. Take a listen.
Prices could go up somewhat short term, but prices will also go down. There could be some short term disturbance, but long term, it's gonna make our country a fortune.
So Americans should prepare for something like Trump.
Well, you said that. I didn't say that. Well, if the prices go up, let's see what happens. Nobody really knows what is going to happen.
Okay, so if these tariffs go into effect, does nobody really know what will happen, or is it clear that U.S. consumers would be paying more?
When a tariff gets imposed, it either gets eaten in part by the company, so the company's profits go down, or it gets passed on to the consumer, or both. Now, for a lot of these products, whether it's a grocery store or a store that sells clothing, they tend to operate on pretty narrow margins, so they can't really reduce their profits all that much, and which means they've got to pass it on to the consumer. And that is the history of tariffs. It does get passed on. It tends to increase the cost of living. And once tariffs are put in place, it's one thing.
Joining me also right now from the Munich Security Conference, we have Democratic Congressman from Colorado, Jason Crow. He's a member of the House Armed Services and Intelligence Committees. Congressman, very good to see you. Thank you for joining me. So between Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth's backtracking of comments that he made regarding security guarantees to Ukraine and the denial of NATO membership, and then Vice President Vance's address to European allies, how do you assess the Trump administration's performance on the world stage, and have they shown the U.S. will be reliable negotiators to end the war in Ukraine?
Alex, the Trump administration's policies are changing not by the day, but by the hour. And I think that's a reflection of the fact that they have no policy. There's no doctrine. There's no policy. They'll put out a tweet, then they'll pull it back an hour or two later. The problem with that is that none of this is funny. None of this is comical, because it has really real consequences to our partnership, to our allies. I am here in Munich because I refuse to let Donald Trump and J.D. Vance and Secretary Hegseth and others be the voice of America to Europe and to the world. There is a group of us here that are engaged in diplomacy, are engaged in discussions to let them know that there's a lot of people in America who understand that our economy is tied to Europe, that our peace and prosperity is tied to Europe, and that we can't pull back into our own borders and forget what's going on in other places.
So in other words, you are trying to accentuate the word reliable.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, there has to be consistency. They have to be able to see that there are people who understand the issue, that understand that consistency and reliability is key. I believe in America's strength through partnership. One of the reasons why America is actually strong is not just because we have aircraft carriers and bombers and all these weapon systems, but because we have partners. Our alliances around the world are actually the envy of our adversaries. China, Russia, and others desperately want friends and allies that look like the ones that we have. They've tried to build out these alliance networks, and they've largely failed. So we have this, and the answer to addressing our problems and our threats is actually to build upon it and expand it, not to pull back from those. But reliability and consistency and being a true good partner is the best way to build those partnerships.
So in terms of strength, that word I'm going to pick on, because I'm curious what you make of Ukrainian President Zelensky's call for the creation of a European army. Is it justified, considering the concerns in Europe, that they can no longer rely on the U.S.?
I think it's too early to tell whether or not they can or can't rely on the United States. And, this notion of strength, I talked about what I think truly makes us strong. It's our partnerships, it's our allies, it's the fact that we are values.
The inflation data just came in, and a lot of experts are saying it is red hot.
Hotter than expected inflation data from the Labor Department showed U.S. prices rose by the most in nearly a year and a half.
So this begs the question, is inflation back? Are we going to see a reacceleration of consumer prices like we saw in 2021 and 2022? And, oh, by the way, are tariffs going to make the consumer price inflation even worse? I'm going to reveal the answers to you in 3 simple fast steps. Step number 1, let's go over this red-hot CPI report that just came out. By the way, the PPI, the Producer Price Index, exceeded expectations as well. Well, let's look at this chart. We start at 2025. We go all the way back to 2020. On the left, we go from 0% up to 10%. This is the CPI and the core CPI. And they always say it excludes the volatile. They can never say it excludes food and energy. They always have to say it excludes volatile food and energy. I don't know why it's like a script that they all use. But anyway, getting back to it here. This red line indicates the CPI. The blue line is the core. So, for the most part, they're kind of working in lockstep, but the CPI goes up to a greater degree and then down to a greater degree. I guess that's why it's volatile. And so, why do we start with the CPI? Because that's what everyone focuses on. Prior to 2020, we're right around 2%. Then we get the cerveza sickness. As you would imagine, it dips down, probably right around almost 0. And then we go straight up to a point where it peaks out around 9.1%. My memory serves me well. In the summer of 2022. And then it goes straight down. Now, this doesn't mean that prices were going down. I know this gets confusing for a lot of people. This just means that the rate of change was going down. So here, prices are still going up. But they're just going up at, let's just say, 3%, if you believe the CPI, as opposed to 9.1%. So we call this disinflation, not deflation, because that would imply prices are going down. But disinflation is prices going up to a lesser degree. 2023, then we kind of flatten out here a little bit, and then we dip down to 2.4%, and the Fed starts dropping rates, oddly enough, and then we go right back to 3% year over year, which still is low considering the 9.1, but again, this begs the question, is this the start to a new acceleration in consumer prices going back to 9, 10, 11, 12%? A lot of people are saying this looks exactly like the 1970s when we had this big wave of inflation at the beginning, and it kind of goes down, and then it goes right back up until Volcker had to break the back of inflation by jacking Fed funds rate up to, what was it, 18, 19, almost 20%. But the key here, that's why I put key right here, for me, isn't necessarily the year-over-year number. Like we said, 3%. It's really a month-over-month. The market expectations were for 0.3%. It's still a significant increase, but we saw a 0.5% increase. That's why all of these experts are calling this CPI report red hot. So what was the market's response? As you would imagine, the 10-year Treasury skyrocketed. It goes up by, at one point in the day, it was up by 11, 12 basis points. It came back down maybe 8 or 9 basis points. But I want to point out that since the Fed started dropping rates, and since we've seen the CPI go from 2.4 up to 3%, during this time frame, approximately, the 10-year Treasury yield has gone up by almost 100 basis points. I think we started right around 3.7 or so, 3.8. It goes all the way to 4.8, and then it came down to maybe 4.5, but then it rocketed right back up over 4.6% when we had this CPI report that was much higher than market expectations. So that's what happened. But now, more importantly, we have to get into what's likely going to happen in the future. And then at the end of this video, we're going to discuss whether tariffs will exacerbate the problem or maybe they'll bring inflation down. Who knows? You have to wait to the end of this video to find out. Step number 2. Now let's go over the probabilities of inflation getting a lot worse throughout the rest of 2025. To start, I want to look at a chart of actually 2007 and 2008. I think you guys are going to find this fascinating. Most of you know from watching my videos, the Fed started the last rate cutting cycle, with the exception of the cerveza sickness, in September of 2007, September 18th, oddly enough. And the Fed funds rate, when they started cutting, was, oddly enough, 5.25%. And of course, hopefully you guys are getting the joke. It's the exact same starting point and the exact same date that we had this go-around. But back then, the CPI was quite a bit different when the Fed started cutting rates. It was right around 3.5%. Now, as the Fed cut rates, what do you think happened with the CPI? And keep in mind, this is right as we are going into the biggest financial crisis since the Great Depression in the United States. So you would assume that the CPI would have gone down. I mean, everybody knows that in 2009, it actually went negative for a quarter. But, so be very counterintuitive. Look at this chart, you'll see the red line go up to the point in the middle of 2008, called June-July. The CPI had gone from 3.5% all the way up to 5.6%. An increase of over 2%, while we were in a disinflationary, if not deflationary, recession. The worst one since the Great Depression. But during that time frame, again, CPI went up by 2%. So I'm not saying right now 2025 is going to be 2008. But what I am saying, staying on the topic of this video, is just because we have seen the CPI go from 2.4 up to 3%, it doesn't necessarily mean that we are in the next wave of a reacceleration of consumer prices, similar to what we saw in the 1970s. And oh, by the way, you can see by looking at this chart what happened once the CPI got up to 5.6. It went straight down to negative 2, like we said earlier. In other words, 2% deflation in 2009 for one quarter. Now, a lot of people would make a great point, and they'd push back and say, George, well, what you're missing is all of this money printing we have had. I mean, in 2020, 21, 22, as money printer go burr. We all remember that meme, that gif with Jerome Powell like this, all the money is spraying out there. And obviously, we didn't have that leading up to the GFC, so you're just comparing apples to oranges. You can't say that, well, because it played out this way in 2008, it could play out this way in 2025 as far as consumer price inflation, because you're leaving out the elephant in the room, a big X factor, which is the growth of money supply. It was almost unprecedented during the cerveza sickness. Okay, well, that's a great rebuttal, but let's go back in history and look at the facts. So let's start by looking at the few years prior to the GFC to see what played out with M2 money supply, and then we can compare that to what has happened, these unprecedented levels of money printing that we have seen since 2020. We'll use the exact same time span. So looking at this chart, we go from right around June or so, 2003, to April 2008, M2 money supply went up by 30%. 30%. Okay. So you would expect that if you look at 2020 to 2025, you would see maybe an increase of 130%, maybe 200%. I mean, again, money printer was going burr, but actually we saw an increase of 38%. And at the end of the day, in my view, that's not enough to make a significant difference between what we saw leading up to the GFC and what we've seen since the cerveza sickness leading up to today. So what we've established is the lead up to this CPI going from 2.4% up to 3% is not necessarily unprecedented. And we have seen this play out where we did have disinflation or actual deflation after we saw that CPI go up by a much more significant degree. Remember, we've only seen it go up by 60 basis points. Back during 2008, we saw it go up by 200 basis points before we eventually had disinflation and deflation. Now, I want to be clear, there are no certainties, there are only probabilities. So what we're trying to do right now is we're trying to look at all variables, all the data, all the facts, and then do a thorough analysis as to what the probabilities are that we see a reacceleration of consumer prices like we saw during the 1970s. And on that note, I want to ask all of you the question, why did we have such high consumer price inflation during 2021 and 2022, 2023? It's because two things. For one, we had the stimmy checks going out, which increased velocity. We did have that result in a dramatic increase of M2 money supply, and the governments destroyed global supply chains. They locked everyone in a cage, for heaven's sakes, for 2 years. Well, that's going to be fewer goods and services as you're increasing aggregate demand with people that have a higher propensity to spend. Therefore, that velocity increases. Of course, you're going to have consumer price inflation go up. But to get a reacceleration, we would have to see that movie all over again. And as you can tell by looking at a chart of M2 money supply, we're actually down over the last 2 years. We have not seen anything near what we saw that created the consumer price inflation to begin with. And if anything, knock on wood with these tariffs, the global supply chains have gotten a lot better. So I don't see any evidence for a repeat of what caused the significant consumer price inflation to happen to begin with, and this is great news. Step number 3. So my base case is we will not see a reacceleration of consumer prices like we did in the 1970s, where we go from the CPI 3%, 5%, 7%, 9%, 12%. But at the end of the day, there are no certainties, there are only probabilities. So this is my best guess. But at the end of the day, nobody really knows. So now let's tackle the question of Trump tariffs. Will this provide a tailwind to consumer prices? Well, we start by looking at a chart of the DXY. This is the dollar versus a basket of other currencies. We'll use it as a proxy for pretty much all other fiat currencies. Today's date, going back to August 2024, we go from 95 up to 110. And you can see we've got a flat line go down a little bit, but it's still over 100. And then we shoot all the way up to about 110 to come down more recently to around 108 or 107. So why is the dollar so important when we try to figure out what the average Joe is going to have to pay for stuff at Walmart, Home Depot, Target if Donald Trump enacts these tariffs? Well, let me go ahead and explain. This guy is not the average Joe. No. But he is the average Joe's Chinese cousin. That is right. Everyone's favorite Chinese manufacturer, the average Joe. And he's got his really cool Chinese hat here. And of course, he's got his Fu Manchu. And he is creating widgets that he is selling and exporting to the United States. He's selling them to his cousin, the average Joe, who's buying them at Walmart, Home Depot, and Target. Let's assume for a moment right now the yuan, which is the Chinese currency, is the exact same as the dollar. Now, it's not, but we're just using this for the sake of the example. So 1 yuan equals $1. Got it. But Joe's cost for his widget is 75 yuan. So he wants to make 25 yuan per sale, so he's charging $100 for his widget at Walmart, Home Depot, and Target. And again, he wants that 25% margin. That's really what he's looking for. So he doesn't really care if he's getting $100. What he really cares about, and this is the key, is that he is getting 100 yuan. So then Donald Trump comes in here and he says, okay, we're going to put in a 100% tariff on everything from China. Okay, fine. So let's assume for a moment the dollar goes from 1 yuan to 2 yuan. It's appreciated in value, just like we can see in this chart. So what that allows the average Joe to do is actually drop the dollar price of his widget, let's say down to $50. Because then when you add Trump's 100% tariff, it's still selling at Walmart, Home Depot, and Target to the average Joe at the $100 original price. But you see what has happened is now Joe's going to take these $50 and exchange them into yuan. And because the dollar has appreciated in value, based on these numbers in the example, he's still going to get his 100 domestic currency units that he needs to have that 25 yuan profit margin. So if the dollar continues to get stronger, and that's a big if, then this could offset the tariffs. So the stuff you are buying that's being imported from XYZ tariff country isn't increasing in dollar price. Now, let's assume for a moment the dollar doesn't continue to appreciate. Let's assume it goes down or it just stays the same. Well, I still don't think the tariffs would increase the cost of an overall basket of goods in the United States. Here's why. Would it increase the price of the stuff that is coming in from the average Joe? Walmart, Home Depot, Target. Absolutely it would. But the average Joe's paycheck isn't likely going to go up at the same rate. Therefore, he's going to be left with a choice. If he allocates more money to buying the average Joe's product, then what's going to happen is he's going to have less money to spend on other things. So you have this robbing Peter to pay Paul that I always talk about, where you have economic activity actually decrease. So yes, it is true, prices would be going up over here, but they likely would be coming down over here. So when you look at the entire basket of goods, prices don't go up as much as the actual tariff. So now let's get over to that breaking news that I talked about earlier. The 10-year Treasury, like we said in step number 1, went way up after that red-hot CPI report. But today, just one day later, I noticed as I was recording this video, the 10-year Treasury yield dropped right back down to where it was prior to the report. So the 10-year Treasury yield seems to be agreeing with what I was saying in step number 2. My base case isn't that we go from 3% consumer price inflation as measured by the CPI straight up to 10, 12, whatever we saw in the 1970s. And another thing I'd like to add is a lot of experts out there say that the Fed is too loose. They have monetary conditions too loose. That's why inflation is going up. But this doesn't really make a lot of sense to me because, like we said in step number 1, the 10-year Treasury over the last, just call it 4 or 5 months, has gone up by 100 basis points. And this is the most important interest rate in the real economy. It isn't necessarily the Fed funds rate. So my point is we really haven't had loosening monetary conditions. Monetary conditions have actually tightened while the Fed has dropped by 100 basis points. So the main takeaway is we have seen the CPI go from 2.4 unexpectedly straight up to 3%, but I don't think this means we're right back into the 1970s. And as far as the tariffs, although it could increase prices over here, I don't think it increases the prices on the entire basket of goods. And if the dollar continues to go up, this could offset the tariffs that Trump puts in place. for more content that'll help you build wealth and thrive in a world of out-of-control central banks, big governments. Check out this playlist. Right here, I will see you on the next video.
Trump and Doge are being sued a lot, and as they should be. Several attorneys general have taken the fight to the battleground of the courtroom, seeking judicial intervention to protect their constituents' rights. Yesterday, a federal judge in the Southern District of New York extended a temporary block on Doge accessing the Treasury Department's payment system in a lawsuit that has been brought by 19 attorneys general. But that judge did not indicate when she would rule on a more permanent solution. Joining me now is Colorado Attorney General Phil Weiser. Attorney General Weiser, it's good to see you. I'm always impressed with the filings that are coming out of the coalition of AGs that you're a part of. Let's talk about strategy moving forward, though. For our viewers that are tuning in, what you have in hand right now is a temporary injunction, meaning just a temporary block until a federal judge enters a more permanent solution, as in a permanent injunction. Is there evidence that is being presented in any way by the government that would support a claim that they're rooting out waste or fraud of any sort?
Sadly, we've yet to see what is happening as about how to make government work better. Instead, what we're seeing is a lot of unauthorized, risky, and dangerous access to American sensitive and personal information. We don't want to see Social Security numbers or bank accounts end up on the internet or the dark web where hackers can get access to it. We've got systems in place to ensure that our government operations work effectively. Those systems were being disregarded and the laws weren't being faithfully executed. Instead, we saw a lot of risky experiments. That's why we took action. I heard from more constituents about this issue around the Doge access to sensitive information than any other issue that I've heard about as Attorney General. By the way, the number 2 on that list was the unilateral spending cuts that were undermining programs interstate. We've got a successful lawsuit on that front, too. Our job is to protect our constituents, for me, people here in Colorado, and to defend the rule of law, and we'll keep doing that.
And I'm so glad that you brought that up, Attorney General, because I think some people labor under the misconception that all of this slashing and burning that is happening to federal employees is happening just in D.C. But the reality is it's happening across the country. Colorado is home, interestingly, to the largest concentration of federal workers outside of D.C. with about 40,000 employees. What specific impact will these cuts have to the functioning of federal offices?
In Colorado right now, we're reeling from the thoughts that our federal employees, take, for example, the national weather observatories that we have here at NOAA, or take, for example, a lot of the work that we're doing here, the National Institute for Standards and Technology. These are crucial to scientific research. Not to mention the federal government funds lots of activities like drug interdiction or survivors of domestic violence. We're dependent on our federal government in lots of different ways, and we've had to bring lawsuits to protect our employees, including, by the way, this cuts to the National Institutes of Health, where Colorado, just the University of Colorado and Colorado State University would have $90 million cut overnight with no justification. A lot of times people may not realize how the federal government impacts so many parts of our lives. The NIH funding, it's about critical medical research, helping to save lives. People who are struggling with cancer or diabetes, they want this research to go forward. We've got a vibrant economy here in Colorado, and if all these steps to cut NIH funding, to stop federal critical programs, and to threaten our sensitive information, if it goes through, we're going to feel it. That's why we're fighting back in court.
So I saw an interesting litigation twist I wanted to talk to you about. There's been 2 lawsuits that have now been filed where they're suing Elon Musk in his individual capacity, right? So the other lawsuits that are taking place are against the administration, against Donald Trump as president. But now we're seeing lawsuits against Elon Musk individually under the same theory that you guys also filed your lawsuit about a violation of appointments clause, because Elon Musk was never Senate confirmed. What's good for the goose is good for the gander. We saw that argument before, launched by the Republicans against Democrats. I mean, so at this stage, Are you getting any type of discovery or any type of information during the litigation process in your own lawsuit that would be useful to the American public to understand how Elon Musk has been able to not only gain access through his Doge tech bros, but also how he's able to even functionally operate if he hasn't been Senate confirmed?
One of the concerns we have, Katie, you put your finger on it, is what are the Doge employees actually doing? There's been a lot of suggestions that they're going to undermine the operations of government as mandated by Congress. And just to put this issue out there, we're defending our republic. We have a separation of powers. We have checks and balances. Congress passes programs, Social Security, for example. And if we have an executive branch saying, we're going to decide who gets Social Security checks, we're just going to withhold some of them. That is illegal. That's an affront to our constitutional system of government. And it is up to the official employees who have lawful authority to exercise it. And if other people are exercising that authority, Elon Musk or anyone else, not the Treasury Secretary, not the head of key departments, that's a problem in terms of the functioning of our republic. One of the points that I would make just on what you said is we have a republic as long as we can keep it. That means we have to safeguard our core values, which is a presidency with limited power and separation of powers. That's what's at stake in this moment.
People need to go back and learn that basic civics lesson, don't they, about separation of powers. Colorado Attorney General Phil Weiser, it's a pleasure to see you, and keep up the good fight. It's good to see you.
Thank you.
The Republican-controlled House Budget Committee is ready to fall in line with Donald Trump's agenda, passing a new budget proposal this week that calls for $4.5 trillion in new deficits through tax cuts and some deep cuts to federal spending, including mandatory spending, which covers programs like Medicare, Medicaid, and food benefits like SNAP. The Senate Budget Committee approved a conflicting resolution this week that doesn't address the issue of taxes. Democrats blasted the House proposal, saying it would harm the middle class. With us now is New York Times congressional reporter and Pulitzer Prize winner Luke Broadwater.
Luke, so much fun on Capitol Hill these days. You've got the House moving in one direction and the Senate clearly wanting to move in another. As NPR reports, Senate Republicans want to proceed with a two-bill approach in order to act more expeditiously on the president's priorities at the border, and then return later this year to address extending tax cuts. The House has different considerations than the Senate. And it goes on to talk about how these separate bills could jeopardize its altogether, ness in the House and the Senate. What's your take on how this plays out given the realities of Capitol Hill? The Republicans don't have the majorities significant enough in the House to really bank on what they want passing. And then, of course, in the Senate, they're like, no, we're not doing that.
Yeah, of course it's a mess.
It's like, how do you state the obvious, right?
Right. Well, I mean, if you paid any attention out there in the country to what Congress has done over the past 2 years, they have a very hard time, the Republicans in Congress, getting on the same page, right? I mean, we've seen them throw out their speaker. We've seen them take weeks to try to get another speaker. They're just rife with divisions all the time. So I would say, as a starting point, I think there's very low chance that this House approved budget ends up becoming law the way it's written right now. That said, Republicans have a sort of conflicting priorities here. There's a lot of talk on Capitol Hill and at the White House about shrinking the debt, right? $36 trillion in debt. At the same time, they want to pass these sweeping tax cuts, right? $4.5 trillion in tax cuts, which adds to the debt, right? So you have these two things that sort of can't both be happening at the same time unless you make deep cuts elsewhere in the government. And that's what the House budget calls for. It doesn't really identify all of the cuts, right? Specifically where these cuts are going to come from, but it says you need to have $2 trillion worth of cuts in mandatory spending, and that's sparking some concern in some people's districts, right? Because we're talking about cuts to food stamps, cuts to Medicare, and so that affects real people's lives in real congressional districts. And so you saw that party line vote this week. You saw Democrats raising a lot of alarms. And you saw even some moderate Republicans saying, hey, if these cuts go beyond sort of, what we could find, the small amounts of fraud or abuse that we can find, we're going to have problems with this budget moving forward.
We've seen a lot of reporting out of red states and members that are starting to realize the ways in which this is going to impact their districts. Luke, can you talk for us about how this debate is playing out side by side with the reality of DOGE and the fact that Republican appropriators are no longer effectively appropriating? I mean, where do those two conversations intersect?
Yeah, it's kind of crazy. We have, traditionally Congress has the power of the purse, right? That's in the Constitution. It's Congress that decides where things are spent or not spent. And what we're seeing now is that Elon Musk has come in with a lot of young guys. They have installed these guys at various agencies, and they're going through and they're slashing things. And sometimes their cuts are not what they say they are, right? They are doing sort of keyword searches for certain terms in USAspending.gov, and they're hitting on things and they're misinterpreting what some of them are. And a lot of federal workers are scared right now because of how deep and sweeping some of these cuts are. I mean, trying to eliminate entire agencies, right? And these are agencies that were approved by Congress. But we're not seeing the pushback from Congress that one would expect, right? You would think in a country that has a long tradition of balance of powers that the legislative branch would stand up for itself and say, hey, Mr. President, Mr. Musk, you can't cut that. We authorize those funds. Those funds are supposed to go for that purpose. That's what Congress passed. Instead, what we're seeing is actually cheering on Capitol Hill as Elon Musk and President Trump cut certain things that have been approved by Congress. So it's kind of we always say things are unprecedented during Trump's term, but it really is in this case where the legislative branch has sort of outsourced in some cases the power of the purse to the president.
Literally just gave it up, rolled over without even a little lick bit of a fight. It's insane. But then you got, and Michael noted this Politico piece for us, that Republican members in the high-tax blue states are concerned that the plan doesn't leave enough room to expand the state and local tax deduction. Senate Republicans and some House hardliners aren't ready to give up on a competing two-bill plan. You've got Republican Representative who is a centrist out of California, David Valadao. His district is one of the 6 Hispanic majority Republican seats, where more than 20% of households receive food aid benefits from the SNAP program that's being targeted under the Republican budget. None of this just makes any sense to me. I'm just like, what is going on, Luke? When you talk to the members, are they at least, the Republican members, at least privately, are they acknowledging that this is insane and the president is trampling on their, constitutional authority as a co-equal branch of government, but they're not going to do anything about it because they're scared to get primary? Are they at least aware of the hypocrisy here and the craziness?
Yeah, well, you have a lot of competing priorities in Congress, right? You have those blue state Democrats that you just mentioned and blue state Republicans that you just mentioned who want to see the state and local tax deduction be greater, so there's less of a tax burden on their citizens. And a lot of them are going to push for that to be added to these budget plans as this goes forward. At the same time, look, food stamps have been a long target of the right. They don't like them. They want to cut them. Which is interesting because that used to be the one program that Republicans really supported in terms of helping the poor because it actually went to food, right? You couldn't say, oh, they're wasting it on something else. It's actually that, it's supposed to be sort of a smart poverty prevention program. But again, that's on the chopping block right now with this budget. And so you saw David Valadao speaking out about that. That's a moderate Republican. That's a seat that Republicans really need to hold if they want to keep their majority. So he has some sway in Congress because he's able to win in that district and he's able to speak up for more moderate values. So look, all these people are going to be weighing in. They're going to be fighting over this. You have the Freedom Caucus at the same time insisting on these $2 trillion in cuts. And the president wants his big tax cuts, $4.5 trillion. So, and it's like a 1 or 2 seat majority at any moment, depending on who's there and who's sick and who's out of town. So you lose 1 or 2 Republicans and you can't get the bill passed. So yeah, look, I expect this to be a long, protracted fight. I expect it to get ugly, and we're going to see some Republican on Republican violence.
Well, we're going to leave it right there. Luke Broadwater, thank you very much for joining us this morning. As judges issue temporary rulings to pause Trump's sweeping executive actions on constitutional grounds, Team Trump is working overtime to discredit America's legal system, with Elon Musk and even J.D. Vance accusing judges of being secret Democratic activists. There's no evidence to support that, by the way, and suggesting the administration could ignore court rulings altogether. George Conway is back with us.
Can I just jump on a point real quick? The judges who are stopping Trump now, like the judges who stopped him around January 6th and the election before that, are Republican judges.
Many of them, yeah. But he has scrambled that. He has scrambled. That is so old school. But that is so old school of us, because you are still thinking of it the way I think of it, which is Democrats, Republicans, progressives, conservatives. He has made it inside and out.
Right.
These people are part of the institution, and thus they are part of the deep state.
Regardless of the fact that he appointed them.
Mm-hmm. Because regardless of the fact that he himself was president of the United States, he somehow convinced people that he was once again an outsider. He's trying to delegitimize the legal system, I think, so that it is very easy for him to ignore the laws, and then the people will be with him. Because the people are like, yeah, these activist judges, and it's like, what? The judges can only consider the cases brought before them. The judges are going in and being like, I hereby decree. People are bringing cases, and they are ruling, not with some animus towards Trump, but like, for the law. This is law being applied fairly.
And to Simone's point, prosecutors are prosecuting.
You persuaded me.
Well,
we like to violently agree.
I agree with everything you're saying.
But they're prosecuting because elements of a crime have been brought in front of them, and they, by order of their sworn oath, follow the crime. Right. And if the crime happens to lead to your death, Donald Trump, because of something you did, that's not political, that's not personal. That's just the way the system works for every other brother and sister out here on the street.
The way I look at it is, Donald Trump is a criminal sociopath. You tick off the definition of a sociopath. They don't want to obey laws, they don't want to obey rules, they don't think they apply to them. And Donald Trump has no moral conscience and no empathy. He does not care about anybody else other than Donald Trump. Which is why, in this first term, he said, Article 2 lets me do whatever I want. Article 2 of the Constitution. The first Trump term, which I call Shit Show 1, was an assault on the rule of law, but it was only like it was like cancer. It was like a stage 1, maybe stage 2. We got to stage 2 right around January 6th. And he was a threat to the rule of law. And then he went into remission. Now he's back. We're at stage 3. Stage 3 is basically where we are ignoring laws and running roughshod over laws. I mean, they're basically refusing to spend money appropriated by Congress, which is against the law. The law requires the president to spend money. The president can't not spend the money that's been allocated for particular subjects. And you've got this guy
who's not been appointed lawfully under the Constitution.
Let's talk about that.
Musk. And so that's stage 3. Stage 4 is going to be, well, these courts are telling me not to obey orders. Why should I? don't want to obey the law, so why am I obeying the courts? And stage 4 is metastasis. Stage 4 is when democracy can die, and the rule of law can die, and constitutionalism can die. And we unless something happens radically, I can't see how we don't get to stage 4, because the logical path that they are taking, which is that the law doesn't apply to us, and nobody can enforce the law against us.
Yes, they're saying these activist judges are saying these things. We can't take the judges seriously. They literally are like, by they I'm talking about J.D. Vance, Donald Trump himself, Elon Musk are saying, since when can a judge tell the president what to do?
So I want you to riddle something up for me, which is, let's say Elon Musk goes after CFPB, has his fingerprints all over CFPB, given that he has a business interest before CFPB that would benefit.
Right.
Then you have people saying, well, then you could have charges of criminal conflict of interest that were brought. Those charges, though, would have to be brought by Trump's DOJ, correct? Okay. So I think given what we are watching, that seems unlikely. What then is the legal mechanism?
It's worse than that. Okay, it's worse. Everyone around Trump feels like they are immune from prosecution. Okay? And that includes Musk. It includes a guy like a Boris Epstein who tried to hold people up from cabinet positions. It includes everyone around him. They have no fear of ever being investigated. If you're friendly with Trump, like Mayor Adams, you get a pass. And even if the Justice Department were highly unlikely to charge you, guess who could give you a pardon if you go back and kiss the ring? Okay? So, but it's worse than that. You point out that the Justice Department isn't going to prosecute any of these minions. It's worse than that. The Justice Department is the only way courts can enforce orders. I'm a judge, and you do something in your court, and you throw something at me. I can throw you in jail for civil contempt, okay, or criminal contempt. If you to enforce my orders, I can as federal judge, I can have you thrown in jail. How do I do that? I say, Marshal, take her away. Guess who the U.S. Marshal Service works for?
Oh my God!
The United States Department of Justice. And who does the United States Department of Justice report to? This is the problem. Courts have no police of their own. They have no army of their own.
Okay.
The only thing that stands between us and utter lawlessness is our willingness, and in particular, the willingness of government officials, including and especially the President of the United States, to obey the court orders, even when they have good faith disagreements with those orders. And this president doesn't have good faith disagreement with any orders. He does not care. He is a lawless criminal. And we have basically a criminal regime. And if you believe that they are going to abide by court orders, they're not going to do it. They're already probably trying to slide around the court orders. But they're not quite yet in open defiance, but we will get there.
Well, yeah, I think we get there much sooner than people may realize, because the speed of this matters. The speed with which they are coming at the system matters. If they did it slowly, give folks a chance to regroup and sort of collect themselves. But now you've got
it's like a safety blitz. I mean,
states, U.S. attorneys general. You've got individual organizations and some individuals out there just running to catch the lawsuits and throw them out there. That's part of breaking down the system.
You know, it's funny though. It cuts a little both ways there. I don't think the Justice Department is going to be able to defend all of these suits because there are so many of them, and they have limited resources at the Justice Department, and some of these lawyers are going to quit, as we have just seen. So they're going to not be able to defend these orders, which tells me they're just going to disobey them. And what they're going to do is they're going to order the Marshal Service not to enforce any orders, any contempt orders against government officials, federal government officials who are disobeying orders, court orders at the behest of the president.
And further to your
I'm so cheery.
No.
But you
further.
telling the truth, and the people need to know, because some people got
I've been saying this. Like I've been saying this to law. I've been saying this to law professors. I'm saying this to smart lawyers. I've been saying it to smart historians and smart political scientists, and I'm begging them in private conversation, tell me I am wrong.
No, and further to your cancer analogy, to think that Mitch McConnell and Merrick Garland each had an opportunity to put a little
And
chemo.
Mitch is kind of finally seeing the light.
Put a little chemo on that bad boy. George Conway, thank you so much.
As Donald Trump tests and even defies limits on presidential power, we are hearing again about checks and balances.
There are supposed to be checks and balances, and it is essential that both Congress and the court do their job to check the president.
It sounds like he's trying to do away with every kind of check and balance.
The power of one must check and balance the other.
The last line, a true reference to John Adams, played by Paul Giamatti in the HBO rendition, one of the founding fathers who built the checks on power which try to protect our democracy. A lot of these are well known, they're taught in school. Instead of a king who wields all power, the U.S. very deliberately divided power across the government. Sounds familiar to most people who've dabbled in any American civic. So Congress gets to write laws and spend the money. The executive branch gets to enforce them and lead the whole federal government within law. Courts then interpret those laws and make their rulings. Paul Giamatti, as John Adams, broke down that as a function of not only divided power across those branches that I mentioned, but also on federalism.
Our nation cannot bind together without powerful central government, but we must also accommodate the needs of our constituent states. The power of one must check and balance the other.
The states. That is Adams on checks and balances, and he goes beyond just the branches I mentioned, right? The federal branches, executive, legislative, the courts, talks about curbing powers in the central government versus the states. Because the states were always and have always been the other check on runaway power. The Constitution says federal authorities are specifically delegated, and the remaining powers are reserved to the states. Simple. Clear. And it's one thing the founders got right. They worried about power grabs. What if one party controlled the White House and the Congress? What if those members of Congress abandoned checking power of, say, a White House they largely agreed with? What if courts were slow to curb a president and his aides rushing power grabs? The rules were built precisely in response to bad experiences with authoritarian rule and kings, and today the states have their own powers. This is often called states' rights or federalism, which refers to this constitutional division. And the founders didn't want the president ruling like a king. That's why they said anything not deemed delegated for federal powers under the president and those authorities goes to the states. Now, this is all front of mind now as Donald Trump either skirts or outright defies laws, tests his powers, and is daring anyone to stop him. Now, we've been covering Trump orders that have at least been already paused by the courts. He failed in a bid to rewrite the Constitution citizenship rules. Others could have a lot of impact because courts can be slow. But here's the key point I want to share with you right now in our special report. These state powers could matter even more. It's a domain where, remember, there's a whole separate government. It's not just the federal government and Donald Trump. There are the state prosecutors, police, state funding, and state political leaders. There are the governors in the states that have their separate powers. And some of them are just using them to work and govern their state. Others, though, with how far-reaching Trump wants to be, are trying to counter his efforts. And this might sound so familiar, you're like, okay, why is the anchorman putting this on the news tonight? Well, it's familiar if you're watching in America and you know our civics, but it's actually unusual. It is different than most countries, which don't have a main government and then 50 sets of laws in other governments. This is an American thing for the most part. America's special federalism, however wonky, and it is at work under threat from someone who has all but said he'd like to be a partial dictator, at least some of the time. So we're watching Democrats deploy this state authority I'm telling you about, sometimes directly against MAGA policies that encroach, patrolling what they argue could be even unlawful, unconstitutional moves by Trump. The states have this special solicitude. They can sue the administration. This is how the Times explains it. They can bring these lawsuits claiming their rights or the rights of their citizens have been violated. The Times is covering this right now for the same reason we've been preparing this report, because if you follow the facts, the states matter. And you can see this in even simple moments. Trump has been trying to avoid the congressional Democrats in the minority, but he has to face governors, particularly when he goes there to their states. Here was Democrat Gavin Newsom. Two leaders of two separate governments within the United States overseeing different laws, state laws and state police there in California and state firefighters versus the feds under the president. And many state officials, seeing what's happening, have been vowing to step it up.
I feel ready, as now a governor of Washington State, to stand up to the Trump administration.
Our interview is to all of you.
We're not going to stop supporting and having the backs of communities and individuals whose values or very lives are being attacked.
Connecticut has never quit on people. We're never going to surrender.
I have one message for President Trump. I'll see you in court.